In November 2008, Zimbabwe's annual inflation rate reached 89.7 sextillion%. That is a number so large it barely fits on a screen. A loaf of bread cost 500 million Zimbabwean dollars in the morning, and more by the afternoon. This was not an accident. And it was not incompetence. It was a choice. Zimbabwe fed itself and exported the surplus. It was called the breadbasket of Africa. The name was accurate. But the prosperity rested on a fault line that independence had not resolved. When Zimbabwe became independent, 4,500 white commercial farmers owned 39% of the country's best agricultural land they had acquired under British colonial rule. 6 million black Zimbabweans farmed the remaining communal areas, which were smaller, less fertile, and less well-watered. The land question had been deferred at independence. It had not been answered. In 2000, Mugabe's government lost a referendum on constitutional reform. For the first time since independence, his political future was uncertain. His response was to accelerate a land reform program that had been proceeding slowly since the 1980s. War veterans and government supporters began seizing white-owned farms across the country. By 2002, over 4,000 commercial farms had been seized. The problem was not the redistribution of land. It was the destruction of the knowledge and capital that made the land productive. The farms that were seized were not simply plots of ground. They were functioning commercial operations with irrigation systems, storage facilities, market connections, and decades of accumulated agricultural expertise. Most of the people who received the land had never farmed commercially. Within 2 years of the seizures, Zimbabwe's agricultural output had fallen by 50%. By 2003, Zimbabwe, the breadbasket of Africa, was importing food. The same land, the same rainfall, the same soil. But the system that had made it productive was gone. As agricultural output collapsed, government tax revenues collapsed with it. Zimbabwe had borrowed heavily to fund the Democratic Republic of Congo War in the late 1990s. It owed reparations to war veterans. It owed salaries to a bloated civil service and military. And it was running out of foreign currency to pay for food imports. The government's solution was the only one it had left: print money. What followed was a progression that sounds like a mathematical joke. In 2006, the Reserve Bank issued a $100,000 note. By 2008, it had issued a $100 billion note. Then a $10 trillion note. Then a $100 trillion note. The largest denomination of currency ever printed by any government in history. That note was worth approximately 40 US cents at the time of issue. Mugabe knew what hyperinflation did to an economy. His economic advisors told him. The IMF told him. He printed anyway. Because the people whose savings were destroyed, the urban middle class, the professionals, the civil society that opposed him, were exactly the people he wanted to weaken, and the people he needed to keep loyal, the military, the war veterans, the party, could be paid in freshly printed billions that cost nothing to produce. By 2008, 80% of Zimbabwe's workforce was unemployed. Life expectancy had fallen from 62 years in 1990 to 44 years. One of the sharpest collapses in life expectancy ever recorded outside of a war. 4 million Zimbabweans, nearly a third of the population, had left the country. A nation that had once been a regional economic model was now dependent on food aid. Zimbabwe's government eventually abandoned its own currency in 2009. The Zimbabwean dollar ceased to exist. The country adopted the US dollar, the South African rand, and other foreign currencies. The printing press stopped. The economy slowly stabilized, but the decade of hyperinflation had destroyed the savings, the institutions, and the trust that take generations to rebuild. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation was not the result of ignorance or accident. It was the result of a government that understood what printing money would do, and decided that the political benefits of doing it outweighed the economic cost. The cost was borne by ordinary Zimbabweans. The benefits accrued to those in power. That is not a Zimbabwean story. That is a story about what happens when the people who control the money supply decide that destroying it is in their interest. The land in Zimbabwe was taken from black Zimbabweans under colonial rule. Mugabe gave it back. The economy collapsed. The question that nobody has fully answered is this: if the redistribution was morally correct, and many people believe it was, does that make what followed acceptable? Or is there a version of justice that an economy can survive? Because Zimbabwe tried one version, and the country is still paying for it.